So if you want to live to see your grandchildren grow up, get a world-class education, and never once have to worry about going completely bankrupt from a single hospital bill, you probably shouldn't move to the United States.
Right, or the UK, or honestly, a lot of the major economic powerhouses.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, if you're looking at the ultimate statistical probability of living just a long, secure, highly educated life, you should actually be looking at a mid-sized former communist nation in Central Europe.
Which is so counterintuitive to how we usually think about global success.
It really is. So to you, the listener, welcome to our deep dive into the sources today. We are opening up a massive multidimensional analysis report that tracks the human development of Czechia. And it covers everything from 1990 all the way to 2023.
It's a fascinating window of time, because
Yeah.
the reason we're dedicating this entire deep dive to this specific country comes down to this one really profound statistical paradox.
Right, the ranking leap.
Exactly, the ranking leap.
So imagine you're looking at a spreadsheet of every single nation on Earth, right? And they're ranked by how well their citizens are actually doing. In 2023, Czechia ranks 29th in the world on the Basic Human Development Index.
Which is already great.
Yeah, it's a very solid upper-tier placement. I mean, most countries would be absolutely thrilled to be 29th.
For sure. But here is the actual hook of the whole report.
Mm-hmm.
The very second you take that exact same global ranking and you adjust it to account for inequality.
Meaning you penalize countries where, like, the rich hoard all the wealth and the poor are just left behind.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
When you apply that penalty, Czechia doesn't just bump up a spot or two. It literally rockets past some of the most famous, wealthiest economies on Earth. It jumps up 15 spots to rank 14th in the entire world.
14th in the world just because they factor in equality.
And that jump of 15 places, it's not just some weird quirk in the math. It's this glaring spotlight on a massive, widening crack right beneath their feet in the global economy.
Because all those other top-tier nations are falling down the list.
Precisely. They suffer this huge penalty for leaving a massive chunk of their population to just fend for themselves. But Czechia, on the other hand, they barely flinch. They hold their ground.
So our mission today, as we go through these sources, is to figure out the how and the why. Like, how does a mid-sized nation manage to completely outperform the world's absolute top developed economies in eliminating inequality?
And how are they maintaining this remarkable, almost stubborn social cohesion while so much of the rest of the world just seems to be fracturing socially and economically?
Yeah, it's a huge question. And we're going to do that by looking way beyond just the raw numbers. Because, I mean, anyone can read a spreadsheet.
But a spreadsheet doesn't tell you what it actually feels like to live in a society.
Exactly. We need to look at the mechanics behind these statistics, because by the time we are done walking through these 3 decades of data, I really think this deep dive will completely reframe how you, the listener, view national success.
I agree. It totally shifts the perspective.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Before we can even look at Czechia's specific report card, we have to make sure we understand the actual subjects they're being graded on.
Because for the longest time, we just used one very blunt ruler to measure a country's success.
Right, gross domestic product, GDP.
Yeah, and we really have to move past GDP if we want to understand actual human prosperity.
It's just too simplistic.
Way too simplistic. I mean, GDP just tells us the total monetary value of goods and services produced in a country. It basically just tells us an economy is busy, that money is moving around.
But it tells us absolutely nothing about whether the people in that economy are actually healthy, or if they're educated, or if they're, living a life of actual dignity.
Exactly.
I always try to think of it this way. If a country has a terrible natural disaster, right, a hurricane or something, and they have to spend billions of dollars rebuilding cities, hospitals, roads, their GDP might actually go up because of all that construction spending.
Which is completely wild when you think about it.
Yeah, right. But no one in their right mind would say the people in that country are doing better because their homes were destroyed.
That is a perfect illustration of why GDP is such a flawed metric for human well-being. It measures activity, it doesn't measure progress.
So what's the alternative? What does the report use?
Well, back in the 1990s, the United Nations introduced the Human Development Index, the HDI. And this is the baseline metric we're going to be talking about a lot today.
Okay, so HDI. And instead of just looking at the size of the bank account, it looks at 3 fundamental dimensions of human life.
Right. First, a long and healthy life. Second, access to knowledge. And third, a decent standard of living.
So health, education, and income.
Basically, yeah. It's the standard metric used to answer a very basic but really complex question. Is this country actually a good place for a human being to live and grow?
But even the HDI alone, it still doesn't tell the whole story, does it? Because I'm thinking you could have a country with a really high average income, but
Hmm.
that average is completely skewed by like a handful of billionaires.
While everyone else is barely scraping by. Yes, absolutely.
So how do they account for that?
That brings us to the most crucial metric in this entire source document, the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, or the IHDI.
The IHDI. Go, yeah.
This is the lens that reveals the true state of a society. It takes that shiny baseline HDI score and it mathematically penalizes it based on how unevenly those three things work. The health, the education, and the income are distributed across the population.
So just to make sure I'm wrapping my head around this, if a country has perfect equality, like everyone has the exact same life expectancy, the exact same education, the exact same income, their IHDI score would be exactly the same as their HDI score.
Precisely. There would be zero penalty.
But obviously, no country on Earth has perfect equality.
No, of course not. So every single country takes a hit. The real question is, how big is the hit?
Right.
If a country has a high HDI but a terrible IHDI, it basically means the wealth, the good hospitals, the best schools, they're essentially hoarded by a tiny elite.
While the vast majority of the population is just locked out.
Exactly.
To give you, the listener, a visual for how this works, I like to think of a nation's wealth kind of like a massive pizza.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Right. So the GDP, that just tells you the total diameter of the pizza. It's a huge pizza. Great. The baseline HDI, that tells you what actual ingredients are on that pizza. Do you have the high quality cheese of good health care? The rich toppings of a solid education system?
And then the IHDI.
Right. The IHDI tells you if one person at the table is eating the entire pie while everyone else is left literally fighting over the crust.
That is a brilliant way to visualize the mechanics of it. That is exactly what it measures.
Thanks. So we've got the HDI and the IHDI. What else are we looking at?
Well, throughout this deep dive, we are also going to introduce a few other specific lenses from the source data, like indices that measure gender parity.
Okay, yeah, that's crucial.
And one really critical metric that measures the environmental cost of all this prosperity. Because looking at this full spectrum is truly the only way to get a three-dimensional picture of a modern society.
Because high income means absolutely nothing if the planetary pressure destroys the environment you live in.
Exactly. And a massive expected lifespan means nothing if half your population, women, for example, are systematically left behind.
Makes total sense. So let's jump right into the baseline data. Let's look at the foundation Czechia built over this 33-year span between 1990 and 2023. What does their trajectory actually look like?
If we look at the grand trajectory of the entire globe first, just to set the stage, from 1990 to 2023, the Global Human Development Index average grew from 0.60 to 0.756.
I want to pause there for a second because I think it's important to just acknowledge that going from 0.60 to 0.756, that's a steady, undeniably positive climb for humanity as a whole.
It really is.
Despite all the doom and gloom in the headlines, the world on average actually is getting healthier, more educated, and wealthier.
It is. The trend line for humanity is generally moving in the right direction. But meanwhile, let's look at Czechia. They started at 0.753 back in 1990.
Wait, so 33 years ago, as they were literally just emerging from decades of communist rule, they were already sitting roughly where the world average is today.
Yes, they had a remarkably strong starting point in terms of basic human development. And from that point, they climbed to a massive 0.915 by 2023.
0.915 out of a possible 1.0. I mean, that puts them in the absolute uppermost echelon, what the UN classifies as very high human development.
Exactly. It's elite territory.
But when you look at the graph in the source material, the journey from 1990 to 2023 wasn't just this perfectly smooth, straight line pointing up. There is a very clear disruption.
Yeah, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right.
When you look at the trend lines for both the world and for Czechia, there is this distinct, sharp downward angle right in 2020. I mean, the pandemic erased years of human development progress globally.
It's just wiped it out.
Completely. And this was primarily driven by excess mortality, people dying prematurely, and of course the massive economic stalling that occurred during the lockdowns.
Oh, wait, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around the scale of what happened next in the data, because this part is fascinating to me. Both the global average and Czechia's score dipped. But Czechia's lead over the world average actually expanded during this crisis.
That is correct.
How is that possible?
Well, before the pandemic, Czechia's lead over the global average was roughly 0.145 points. Coming out of the pandemic, that lead stretched to 0.159.
So while the whole world took a massive hit, Czechia took a comparatively smaller hit, or they recovered way faster, which actually widened the gap between them and the rest of the planet.
That's exactly what the data shows.
But how does a country actually do that? How do you absorb a once-in-a-century global shock better than most of the world?
This is where we have to really look at the mechanics of social cohesion. That expansion of your lead isn't some statistical accident. It proves an intense systemic resilience.
Systemic resilience, what does that look like on the ground?
Think of a nation's social safety net, like the suspension system on a car. When a car with no suspension hits a massive pothole, which is basically what COVID was to the global economy, the impact just shatters the axle.
Right, the car is ruined.
Exactly. In a highly unequal society, when a shock hits, the bottom drops out completely. The vulnerable lose their jobs, and because their healthcare might be tied to their jobs, they lose their healthcare right in the middle of a pandemic.
So the economic shock instantly becomes a biological shock.
Precisely. They have absolutely no cushion.
Yeah.
But when a car with a highly engineered, robust suspension system hits that exact same pothole, it absorbs the blow.
It bounces.
It bounces. In a highly cohesive society like Czechia, with strong, universal social safety nets, the whole society basically braces for impact together.
Because the baseline is already secured.
Right. Because healthcare is universal and not tied to employment, losing your job during a lockdown doesn't mean you suddenly can't see a doctor if you get sick.
Which is huge.
It's massive. And because the state heavily subsidized wages to keep businesses afloat during that time, mass bankruptcies were prevented. The social infrastructure literally acts as a shock absorber, preventing a temporary crisis from becoming a permanent generational collapse.
That makes perfect sense. It's not that the virus didn't shit them, it's that the societal structure was fundamentally designed to bend instead of break.
That's a great way to put it.
Let's look at the ultimate result of that healthcare structure, though. Let's talk about the most fundamental metric of all, staying alive.
The longevity race.
The longevity race. According to the 2023 data in the report, the global life expectancy at birth is 73.4 years.
Which, again, historically is quite high.
True. But if you are a Czech citizen, your life expectancy is 79.8 years.
Nearly 80 years old. That is a 6.4-year premium over the global average.
I really want you, the listener, to just pause and think about what 6.4 extra years of life actually means to a human being.
It's enormous.
Right. It's so easy to just read it as a decimal on a page, like, oh, 6.4. But 6.5 years. That is literally the difference between passing away before your grandchild is even born and watching them graduate from kindergarten.
Exactly.
It's having an entire second act after you retire. It's a whole extra chapter of existence granted to you simply by the environment, the policy, and the healthcare system you just happen to live in.
And it changes the psychology of a nation, too.
How so?
Well, when the vast majority of your population confidently expects to live to 80, it changes how people plan their finances. It changes how they invest in their careers, how families are structured over time. It creates a long-term stability that feeds right back into the economy.
That's a really good point. If you know you're going to be around, you invest in the future.
Exactly.
And within that health data, there's a really specific trend regarding gender, right? Because historically, men and women don't always age at the same rate.
No, they don't. And there is a distinct and very positive narrowing of the gender longevity gap in Czechia.
Okay, what does that look like?
Well, globally, women tend to outlive men, and that is historically true in Czechia as well. As of 2023, Czech women have a life expectancy of 82.6 years.
Wow.
Right? And men are at 77.0. But the real story here is the growth since 1990.
Okay, let's hear it.
Czech men's life expectancy grew by an incredible 9.5 years over that 33-year span.
Almost a decade of extra life added for men.
Yes. Meanwhile, women's life expectancy grew by 7.2 years. So both are seeing fantastic gains, but the men's health outcomes are catching up rapidly, meaning the gap between the genders is slowly closing.
So they're living nearly 80 years on average. The men are catching up to the women. Now let's look at what they are actually doing with all those long lives.
Let's look at the education data.
Yes, let's open up the knowledge bank. Because if health is the foundation, education is the engine. And honestly, the education numbers in this report are almost hard to believe.
They really are exceptional.
Expected years of schooling in Czechia hit 16.8 years. The global average is 13.0 years.
And we should probably clarify the difference between expected years and mean years, because the report uses both.
Oh, good call. What's the difference?
Expected years
Hmm.
is what a child entering the school system today can anticipate completing, assuming current enrollment trends hold steady.
Okay, so it's a projection for the kids today.
Right. But the mean years of schooling, that is the actual realized average years of education that adults aged 25 and older have already completed.
Okay, got it. So what is the actual realized average for adults in Czechia?
The mean years of schooling in Czechia sits at 13.0 years,
And the global average?
way down at 8.7 years.
8.7 versus 13.0. I want the listener to really internalize that gap. Because 8.7 years of schooling globally means, on average, the world's population is basically dropping out of the education system around middle school, maybe early high school.
Yeah, early high school at best.
But a 13.0 average in Czechia means the standard baseline expectation is that you not only finish high school, but you move into higher education, specialized trade schools, or university.
And that completely alters the skill level, the civic engagement, and the economic output of an entire populace.
It has to, right?
Absolutely. When the baseline of your society has finished secondary education, the types of industries you can attract, the level of political discourse you can sustain, the innovation you can generate, it's exponentially higher than a society where the average citizen stopped learning at age 14.
And here is the real aha statistic. This absolutely floored me when I read it in the source files.
I know exactly which one you're going to mention.
It's crazy. If you look at the window between 2006 and 2021, the percentage of Czech women over the age of 25 with at least some secondary education was nearly 100%.
Nearly 100%.
That is just, I mean, that effectively represents a total flawless saturation of secondary education.
It does. It means that finding a woman in Czechia without a secondary education background is an absolute statistical anomaly.
Which is a generational triumph. It practically eliminates illiteracy and basic educational poverty for half the population.
It's an incredible baseline to build an economy on.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Let's look at this objectively. They live nearly 80 years. The healthcare system is so robust it absorbs pandemics. Practically every single citizen gets a solid education lasting well past high school. My immediate thought reading this is this just a case of a wildly wealthy country throwing an infinite amount of money at hospitals and schools?
A fair question.
Right. Because how does their actual wealth compare to the global superpower economies? If they are just endlessly rich, well, of course they can afford this utopian setup.
That is the exact right question to ask. And to answer it, we have to really look at the economic reality in the report. Because they are certainly not an impoverished nation, but they are also not the wealthiest nation on Earth by a long shot.
They aren't printing infinite money.
No. It's not just about how much raw money they have. It's about unparalleled access and what they actually do with the wealth they generate.
Let's link those social foundations to the economic engine then. Do they have the raw cash to back up this long, educated life?
Well, in 2023, Czechia's gross national income, or GNI, per capita, and this is based on purchasing power parity, which adjusts for the actual cost of living in the country.
Which is important, yeah.
Right. It was roughly $45,889.
Okay, almost 46K. And the global average?
The global average is $20,327.
So a Czech citizen essentially has 2.25 times the purchasing power of the average global citizen.
Exactly.
So they are very comfortable. They are a highly developed, wealthy European nation. But I would have assumed that having 2.25 times the wealth doesn't automatically mean you have no inequality.
It definitely does not.
I mean, look at the United States or the UK or other massive economies. Huge wealth, massive GNI per capita, but staggering, heartbreaking gaps between the rich and the poor.
And this is exactly where we bring back that crucial metric we discussed at the very beginning, the inequality-adjusted HDI, the IHDI.
The funnel.
Yes, the mathematical funnel that shows us exactly how much human potential is lost to greed, to structural barriers, or to poor policy.
This is the metric that explains why Czechia jumps from 29th to 14th in the world, right?
This is the run.
Walk us through how that funnel works globally first, just to set the baseline. When you take the entire world's human development score, all that health, education, and wealth, and you run it through that inequality funnel, what happens to the global score?
It's a tragedy, statistically speaking. Globally, human development suffers a massive 21.9% value loss due to inequality.
21.9%. Wow.
Think about the scale of that. More than a fifth of all human progress, all the wealth generated, all the medical advancements, is effectively erased from the societal ledger because it is not shared, it's hoarded.
It's just locked away at the top.
Exactly. The world's IHTI drops to a dismal 0.59.
A 21.9% loss. That is staggering. And now let's look at the Czech premium.
Let's look at it.
When you run Czechia's stellar 0.915 human development score through that exact same inequality funnel, what is their loss?
Their loss is a mere 5.2%. They retain an IHDI of 0.867.
So they keep almost all of their human development value completely intact.
Yes, they do.
A 5.2% loss compared to a 21.9% global loss. We have to break down the mechanics of how they actually do this, because it's not magic.
It's definitely not magic.
Right. It's not just that Czech people are inherently more generous, it's policy. How does a country legally and structurally ensure that only 5% of its potential is lost to inequality?
They do it through what economists call distributive justice. And the mechanisms for this are deeply embedded in their post-1990 transition.
Right, because they were moving away from communism.
Exactly. When they moved away from a command economy, they didn't just adopt a ruthless, unchecked Wild West free market. They consciously maintained and modernized massive social infrastructures.
What does that actually look like in daily life for a citizen there?
It means progressive taxation, where those who earn the most contribute significantly more to the state pool. It means universal public health care that is virtually free at the point of use.
Meaning a cancer diagnosis doesn't lead to personal bankruptcy.
Exactly, which is a massive driver of inequality in other countries.
Yeah.
It also means education from primary school all the way through top-tier universities is heavily subsidized or entirely free.
So they essentially built a floor beneath their society.
A very solid floor, yes.
You can still get rich in Czechia, you can start a business, you can succeed, you can be wealthy, but there is a hard, concrete floor of health, education, and basic dignity that the state simply will not allow you to fall beneath.
Precisely. To put a finer point on it, the data shows their education and equality index is an incredibly low 1.156.
Meaning the gap between the most educated and least educated is remarkably small.
Right. They don't have a system where elite private schools create a permanent ruling class while underfunded public schools create a permanent underclass. The quality is remarkably consistent across the board.
I really want you, the listener, to visualize this for a second. Think about your own town, your own city, your own country. Imagine if your society didn't lose a fifth of its potential simply because the gap between the haves and have-nots was too wide.
It's hard to even picture.
It is. Imagine if all that lost potential, the brilliant kids who couldn't afford college and had to work minimum wage instead, the families whose generational wealth was totally wiped out by a single medical emergency. The neighborhoods starved of infrastructure because the tax base fled to the suburbs. Imagine if all of that was just fixed.
That is what a 5.2% loss rate looks like compared to a 21.9% loss rate. It is a society successfully keeping its wealth intact for everyone.
It's a profound achievement.
It is, and it requires immense, deliberate, daily policy focus. It doesn't happen by accident, and it certainly doesn't happen just by letting the free market operate completely unchecked.
Right, it requires a societal consensus that extreme inequality is just fundamentally unacceptable.
Exactly.
So if Czechia is this brilliantly engineered utopia of economic and educational equality, my immediate thought is, does this fair house apply to everyone equally?
Now we get to the nuance.
Right. Specifically, how does this play out between men and women? Do men and women share this society perfectly equally? Because often we see that economic equality can mask really deep cultural inequalities.
That is a vital transition to make, because the answer is a really fascinating, complex mix of historic triumphs and some very surprising, very persistent hurdles.
So to understand it, we have to look at another lens provided in the report, the Gender Inequality Index, or the GI.
And the GII specifically measures the loss of achievement due to gender disparities. It looks at reproductive health, empowerment, and labor market participation.
So it measures where women are actively held back.
Yes. And let's start with the triumphs, because the progress here has been incredibly rapid. In 1990, right after the fall of communism, their GII score was 0.24. But by 2023, it fell to an astonishing down 0.08.
And remember, for the listener, on the inequality indexes, a lower score is better. You want your inequality score to be as close to 0 as possible.
Exactly. And that score of 0.08 ranks them 32nd globally in gender equality.
Which is fantastic. For context, the world average is still lagging way behind at 0.455. Czechia's gender inequality is just 19.3% of the world average.
And when we look at why that score is so low, we have to talk about reproductive health, because the data driving this score is just staggering. This is where Czechia shines brighter than almost anyone on the planet.
They really do.
Let's look at maternal mortality, basically the number of women who die from pregnancy-related causes. In Czechia, that number is 3.4 per 100,000 live births.
3.4. It is an incredibly low number.
And the world average?
The world average is 216 per 100,000.
216. Let's pause here and really process that. The global risk of a woman dying in childbirth is 63 times higher than it is in Czechia.
63 times.
Out of 100,000 births globally, 216 families lose a mother. In Czechia, it's roughly 3. How does the medical system achieve that? Because that doesn't just happen by wishing for it.
It comes right back to that universal healthcare infrastructure we talked about earlier. Achieving a 3.4 maternal mortality rate requires a flawless, localized network of prenatal care.
It has to be everywhere. Everywhere. It means every single pregnant woman, regardless of her income, her job, or what city or village she lives in, has immediate, free, and frequent access to obstetricians and ultrasound technology.
So complications are caught months before birth.
Right. Not in the emergency room during labor, which is when it's often too late. It is the ultimate proof that removing financial barriers to healthcare saves lives on a massive systemic scale.
And on top of that, you can see it in the adolescent birth rate, births to young women ages 15 to 19. In Czechia, it's just 6.0 per 1,000.
Compared to the world average of 39.1.
Which tells us that young women in Czechia are largely delaying pregnancy.
Yes, they are focusing on that near 100% secondary education rate we discussed. They have comprehensive access to family planning and reproductive education. And when they do decide to have children later in life, the medical system protects them with near-flawless efficacy.
And this translates directly into parity in basic development. The report uses the Gender Development Index, the GDI, which measures the ratio of female to male human development.
And a ratio of 1.0 would be absolute, perfect statistical equality.
Right. And Czechia is at 0.987.
That 0.987 puts Czechia in the absolute top tier globally. The female HDI score is 0.908, which is incredibly close to the male HDI score of 0.919.
It paints a picture of a society where a girl born today has the exact same expected years of schooling as a boy. She receives the same flawless health care, and she is fully expected to complete her education.
But
There's a but here.
there is always a but. It's not perfect. There is a ceiling.
Yes, there are hidden ceilings, because high human development and even perfect educational parity do not automatically erase deep-seated cultural biases or structural challenges in the workforce.
No, they don't.
Let's look at the empowerment and labor data, because this is where the paradox really reveals itself. In the political sphere, the gap is glaring. In the national parliament, women hold only 23.8% of the seats.
Now, yes, that is up from 13.9% back in 1990.
True, it's progress, but 23.8% actually trails the global average of 26.5%.
That's the paradox, isn't it? The world, on average, has a higher percentage of women in parliament than this highly developed, highly educated, highly egalitarian European nation.
And that political gap is perfectly mirrored by a gap in the workforce. The female labor force participation rate in Czechia is 51.8%, but for men, it is 68.5%.
That is a 16.7 percentage point gap in labor force participation.
It's a massive gap. It's like building a state-of-the-art high-performance race car. You have perfectly equal education, you have phenomenal world-class healthcare, the tires are perfect, the aerodynamics are flawless.
Right.
But when it comes time to actually race the car, when it comes to the boardroom, the executive suite, or the parliament, we are artificially restricting the fuel to half the engine. Why? If the education is equal, why aren't the outcomes at the top equal?
The data strongly suggests that perfect educational parity doesn't fix the structural challenges related to balancing family and career. And in Czechia, this is deeply tied to their maternity leave policies.
Wait, really? Their maternity leave?
Yes. It is a fascinating example of a progressive benefit creating a traditional barrier.
Explain how that works. How can a benefit be a barrier?
Well, Czechia offers some of the longest, most heavily subsidized maternity and parental leaves in the world. They often allow a parent to stay home for up to 3 or 4 years per child while receiving state benefits.
3 or 4 years? On paper, from a human development standpoint, that sounds incredible.
It does. It allows for deep early childhood bonding and completely removes the immediate financial stress of having a newborn.
Right. I mean, most people in countries with no paid leave would practically kill for 3 years of subsidized time with their baby.
Exactly. But in practice, because of persistent cultural norms, It is overwhelmingly women who take this years-long leave, not men.
Oh, I see where this is going.
So if a woman has 2 children, she might be entirely out of the workforce for 6 to 8 years during her late 20s and early 30s.
Which are the exact critical years for building a career, establishing seniority, climbing the corporate ladder.
Or building the network required to run for political office.
Wow.
Precisely. When she attempts to re-enter the workforce at age 35, her male colleagues who did not take years off have already advanced into management and executive roles.
So the lengthy leave policy, while obviously well-intentioned for child welfare, inadvertently stalls female career progression permanently.
It cements a traditional dynamic where the man is the primary earner and the woman is the primary caregiver. It perfectly explains both the labor gap and the lack of women in parliament.
That is such a profound insight. It just shows how complicated social engineering really is. You fix one problem, infant care and maternal stress, but you accidentally create a glass ceiling that keeps women out of the legislature.
It is the next great frontier for their social policy. How do you maintain the health benefits of strong family support without structurally removing women from the halls of power?
That's a really tough needle to thread. So to summarize what we've uncovered so far in this deep dive, we are looking at a nation that is wealthy, incredibly long-lived, highly educated, beautifully egalitarian when it comes to class and income, and incredibly safe for mothers.
But every ledger has 2 sides.
Right. We've seen the political ceiling for women. But there is a much larger, much darker shadow hanging over this entire societal machine. How are they fueling this utopia?
And this brings us to the final and perhaps most urgent lens of the report: the planetary pressures adjusted HDI, or the PHDI.
Because when you factor in the environmental impact required to sustain this comfortable, highly equitable lifestyle, the narrative of the Czech miracle gets very, very complicated.
It does. Let's look at the ultimate toll. The PHDI takes a country's human development score and mathematically docks points based on their carbon emissions and their material footprint.
Essentially, how many resources they're extracting from the Earth to keep the lights on.
Exactly. And when you take Czechia's beautiful 0.915 score and adjust it for planetary pressure, it strips away 16.5% of their human development value.
Ouch.
Yeah, it drops the score all the way down to 0.764.
Just to give the listener context for how severe that penalty is, the global average loss when adjusted for environmental impact is only 10.1%. So Czechia is losing significantly more of its value to environmental damage than the rest of the world.
And the raw numbers behind that penalty are really stark. In 2023, Czechia produced 8.16 tons of carbon dioxide emissions per capita.
For every single person in the country, around 8 tons of carbon were pumped into the atmosphere.
Right, and the world average is just 4.54 tons.
So they are almost double the global average.
Yes.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate again, and let's just ask the hard ethical question. What does this actually mean? Is this highly equal, comfortable, educated society essentially subsidizing its egalitarian utopia with a massive industrial footprint that harms the planet?
Are they buying their incredible 5.2% inequality loss rate with coal and heavy industry?
Exactly.
Well, if we look at the historical context of the region, the answer is largely yes. I like to call it the green shadow of prosperity.
The green shadow.
You have to remember how Czechia built its wealth. After 1990, they integrated into the European economy by becoming an absolute powerhouse of manufacturing. Heavy industry, automotive manufacturing, machinery, these are the engines of their economy.
Right. And manufacturing creates jobs.
Exactly. And not just any jobs, but good, stable, unionized, middle-class jobs. The kind of jobs that keep the Gini coefficient low.
The kind of jobs that ensure wealth is distributed among the working class rather than hoarded by tech billionaires.
Right. They built an incredibly fair, sturdy house, but they built it on top of a smokestack. And traditionally, those industries have been powered by coal-heavy energy grids.
It's the ultimate tightrope walk. You can't just casually say, well, shut down all the coal plants and car factories tomorrow to save the environment.
Because if you do that, you destroy the middle-class jobs that keep your inequality so remarkably low.
You would accidentally create the very wealth gap you've spent 33 years successfully fighting against.
Exactly. But at the same time, you can't keep burning 8 tons of carbon per person to keep the middle class comfortable while the planet warms.
This is the great transitional pressure highlighted by the data then. This is the challenge for the next 3 decades. How do you decouple high human development from planetary extraction?
Can you maintain a society where nobody is left behind without leaving the planet in ruins for the next generation?
That is the big question. And that is a perfect pivot to our final synthesis. With all of this extensive 33-year data on the table, how does a nation actually plot a course forward?
If we visualize the nation based on everything we've read in these sources, we can essentially draw a radar chart of their strengths and weaknesses.
On the strengths side, the peaks are incredible, historic achievements. Massive income equality, that IHDI premium that rockets them up 15 spots globally, proving that wealth actually can be shared.
Near zero maternal mortality, making it one of the safest places on earth to be a mother.
And near universal education coverage for both men and women.
But on the weaknesses side of the radar chart, the dips are equally clear and they demand immediate attention. Low female representation in parliament, a significant 16.7% gap in labor force participation, and an immense carbon and material footprint that is actively dragging down their true planetary value.
So, based on the source document, there is a clear roadmap to the year 2030. To maintain this resilience and actually serve as a sustainable model for the rest of the world, 3 critical areas must be addressed. Number 1, the green transition.
They have to drastically lower that material footprint. They must stop the hemorrhaging of their PHDI value.
What does that entail practically?
It means aggressively transitioning the energy grid away from coal, modernizing their automotive and manufacturing sectors to be circular and green, and doing so through careful policy that retrains workers rather than causing mass unemployment.
They have to prove that a green economy can still be an egalitarian economy.
Exactly. Number 2 on the roadmap, political participation.
Right. They need to actively elevate women into core decision-making roles. Because a society cannot have a nearly 100% secondary education rate for women and only 23.8% of them in parliament.
Just doesn't make sense. That is a massive pool of highly educated, capable human capital that is currently locked out of shaping the future of the country.
And number 3, which ties directly into number 2, labor balance.
They must create optimized policy support to close that workforce participation gap.
Which means looking really hard at their childcare infrastructure.
It means rethinking how maternity and paternity leaves are structured. Perhaps incentivizing fathers to take equal leave so that the career penalty is shared or eliminated entirely.
Ensuring that a woman's career doesn't stall permanently simply because she starts a family.
Right.
Bringing it all together, what really strikes me about this entire deep dive is that despite the environmental and gender labor challenges they still face, Czechia has already successfully proven the absolute hardest part of modern economics. They have proven, with 33 years of hard, irrefutable data, that immense world-class wealth actually can be transformed into a highly shared, cohesive society.
That is the paramount takeaway from this report. We are so often told by politicians and economists that extreme inequality is just, a mandatory byproduct of economic development.
Yeah, that it's unavoidable.
Right. We are told it is an unavoidable law of nature, that as a country gets richer, a massive underclass must inevitably be left behind. The data from Czechia proves that is a myth.
It proves it is a choice.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to the end of our exploration today. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. I really hope peeling back the layers of these indices and looking at the actual human mechanics behind all these numbers brought you a totally new perspective on what it actually means to be a developed nation.
It's a great reminder that a truly successful society isn't just about how big the economic pie gets. It's about ensuring every single person has a seat at the table, a long life to enjoy it, and a healthy planet to live on.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thing to ponder as you go about your day. We just spent this time looking at hard data, proving that a mid-sized nation can essentially engineer the wealth gap out of existence. They can provide near universal education and world-class health, keeping their people alive longer and healthier than the global average, all while losing only 5% of their potential to inequality.
Which is an incredible feat.
So look around. Look at the global superpowers, the absolute economic titans of the world, the countries with the tallest skylines and the most billionaires that are currently suffering from massive, fracturing internal inequality and social unrest. Is the ability to fairly distribute wealth dictated by the size and complexity of a country? Or does the case of Czechia prove that inequality is simply a policy choice that the biggest nations on Earth are actively choosing not to make?